The morning sun cast long shadows across Kensington Palace as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood quietly by the window of their private apartments. Her usually bright eyes held a weight that seemed to pull at her very soul. The doctor's words from 3 days ago still echoed in her mind like a cruel symphony that refused to end. Stage 4. Terminal. 6 months, perhaps less. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, watching the world outside continue its relentless march forward while her own world had suddenly, devastatingly, come to a halt. The irony wasn't lost on her that just beyond these walls, millions of people went about their daily lives, unaware that the woman they had come to love and admire was facing the greatest battle of her life, one she knew she couldn't win. William emerged from the bathroom, his hair still damp from the shower, moving with the careful precision of someone trying desperately to maintain normalcy in an abnormal situation. He had barely slept in the 3 nights since Dr. Harrison had delivered the news that had shattered their carefully constructed world. The man who had once been a search and rescue pilot, trained to remain calm in the face of life and death situations, found himself struggling to breathe normally in his own home. "The children will be up soon," he said softly, his voice carrying none of its usual warmth. Catherine turned from the window, and, for a moment, they simply looked at each other across the space that suddenly felt like an ocean between them. In her eyes, he saw his own reflection of disbelief, anger, and a kind of grief that begins before death even arrives. "I've been thinking about what to tell them," Catherine replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "George is old enough to understand some of it, but Charlotte and Louis." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence that would acknowledge the reality of leaving her babies behind. William crossed the room in 3 quick strides and pulled her into his arms. She melted against him, and, for a moment, they were just a husband and wife facing an impossible situation, not the future king and queen consort of England. Her body shook with silent sobs that she had been holding back since the moment the oncologist had spoken those devastating words. "We'll figure it out together," William whispered into her hair, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. Something so ordinary and precious that it made his chest tighten with the knowledge of how finite these moments had become. "We'll take it one day at a time." But, even as he spoke the words, William felt the crushing weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. How do you prepare 3 young children for losing their mother? How do you continue royal duties while your wife battles cancer? How do you smile and wave for the cameras when your heart is breaking into 1,000 pieces? The sound of small feet running down the hallway interrupted their moment of private grief. Charlotte burst through the door first, her golden hair flying behind her like a banner, followed closely by Louis, who was still in his dinosaur pajamas and clutching his favorite stuffed elephant. George appeared more quietly, the 9-year-old already showing signs of the thoughtful, observant nature that would one day serve him well as king. "Mummy, Daddy," Charlotte launched herself at Catherine, who caught her daughter and spun her around, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. In that moment, watching Catherine with their daughter, William felt his heart break and mend simultaneously. How could someone so full of life, so necessary to their family and to the world, be slipping away? "Good morning, my darlings," Catherine said, settling Charlotte on her hip while Louis climbed onto William's lap. "Did everyone sleep well?" The morning routine that followed was both achingly normal and surreal. William found himself memorizing every detail. The way Catherine cut George's toast into perfect triangles, how she patiently helped Louis tie his shoes, the gentle way she brushed Charlotte's hair. These ordinary moments had suddenly become precious beyond measure. After breakfast, as the children played in the garden under the watchful eye of their protection officers, Catherine and William retreated to his study. The room, lined with books and family photographs, had always been their sanctuary for serious conversations. Now it felt like a place where dreams came to die. "I want to continue with the engagements," Catherine said before William could speak. She sat across from his desk, her back straight, every inch the princess she had become. "For as long as I'm able." "Kate, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." Her voice was firm, brooking no argument. "The mental health initiatives, the early childhood development programs, they matter too much to abandon. And the people, they deserve to know. But on our terms, in our time." William leaned back in his chair, studying his wife's face. Even now, facing her own mortality, she was thinking about her duty, about the causes that had become her life's work. It was one of the things he loved most about her, and one of the things that terrified him most about losing her. The press will be relentless, he said quietly. Once word gets out, they'll want every detail, every moment. Are you prepared for that? Catherine was quiet for a long moment, her gaze drifting to the photograph on William's desk. A candid shot from their wedding day, both of them laughing at something one of the page boys had done. They looked so young, so certain that love could conquer anything. I've spent over a decade in this fishbowl, she said finally. But this feels different. This is our story to tell, our goodbye to control. I won't let them turn our family's pain into tabloid fodder. The weight of her words settled between them. This was really happening. They were really planning for a future where she wouldn't be there to see George's coronation, to walk Charlotte down the aisle, to teach Louis how to be a good man. The future that had always seemed infinite had suddenly become terrifyingly finite. A soft knock interrupted their conversation. Maria, their longtime private secretary, appeared in the doorway with an expression that managed to be both professional and deeply sympathetic. Your Royal Highnesses, forgive the interruption. The king has asked to see you both at Buckingham Palace this afternoon. He said it was urgent. Catherine and William exchanged glances. They had told Charles about the diagnosis the day before, and William had watched his father's face crumple in a way he had never seen before. The man who had waited 73 years to become king, who had finally found his stride as monarch, was now facing the prospect of losing the daughter-in-law who had become like a real daughter to him. Of course, William replied. Please confirm we'll be there at 3. After Maria left, Catherine stood and walked to the window again. The garden where their children played was visible from here, and she could see George teaching Louis how to kick a football while Charlotte attempted cartwheels on the grass. The scene was so perfectly ordinary, so beautifully normal, that it took her breath away. I keep thinking about time, she said without turning around. How we always assume there's more of it. I have lists of things I wanted to teach them, places I wanted to take them, books I wanted to read to them when they're older. William joined her at the window, slipping his arm around her waist. Then, we'll make new lists. Shorter ones, maybe, but no less important. We'll make every moment count. She leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. I'm scared, William. Not of dying. Well, yes, that too, but of leaving them. Of leaving you. Of all the things I'll miss. I'm terrified, William admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to do this without you. I don't know how to be the father they need, the king the country needs, without you beside me. They stood there in silence, watching their children play, both understanding that their world had fundamentally changed in ways that couldn't be undone. The future they had planned, built around duty and service and family, now had an expiration date that neither of them was prepared to accept. The afternoon meeting with King Charles was held in his private study at Buckingham Palace, away from the staff and courtiers who might overhear. Charles stood as they entered, his usually perfect posture seeming somehow diminished. The past day had aged him visibly, adding lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. My dear children, he said, embracing Catherine first, and then William. How are you holding up? We're managing, Papa, Catherine replied, though her voice wavered slightly on the familiar term of endearment. They sat around the small table Charles used for informal meetings, the setting sun casting long shadows across the ornate room. For a moment, they were just family members trying to make sense of an impossible situation. I've spoken with the Archbishop of Canterbury, Charles began carefully, and with the Prime Minister. They both want you to know that whatever you need, whatever support you require, it will be provided without question. Thank you, William said. That means more than you know. Charles leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. There's something else. I know this may seem premature, but we need to discuss arrangements. The constitutional implications. The children's education. Your role, William. Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. Constitutional implications. They were already planning for her death, already figuring out how the monarchy would function without her. It was necessary, she knew, but it made everything feel more real, more final. The children stay in their current schools as long as possible, William said firmly. They need normalcy, routine. As for constitutional matters, we'll cross those bridges when we come to them. Of course, Charles said quickly. I only mention it because, well, because the institution must continue. But family comes first. Always. They talked for another hour about practical matters, medical care, security arrangements, how to manage the inevitable media attention. But underneath the logistics and protocols, there was an undercurrent of grief that none of them wanted to acknowledge openly. As they prepared to leave, Charles pulled Catherine aside. "My dear girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've been the daughter I never had. The way you've embraced this role, this family. I want you to know how grateful I am. How proud I am." Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. "Thank you, Papa. That means everything to me. And I want you to know," Charles continued, "that those children, your children, will be loved and protected always. They'll never want for anything, least of all for people who remember their mother and honor her memory." The drive back to Kensington Palace was quiet, both William and Catherine lost in their own thoughts. The reality of their situation was beginning to sink in, not just the medical reality, but the human one. They were going to have to say goodbye, not just to each other, but to the life they had built together, the future they had planned. That evening, after the children were asleep, Catherine sat in her favorite chair in their sitting room, a photo album open on her lap. William found her there, tears streaming silently down her face as she looked at pictures from their early courtship, their wedding, the children's births. "I was trying to remember everything," she said when he sat beside her. "Every first, every milestone. I don't want to forget anything." William gently took the album from her hands and set it aside, then pulled her close. "You won't forget. And neither will they. Love doesn't end with death, Kate. What we've built together, our family, our bond, that's forever. Promise me something," Catherine whispered against his chest. "Promise me you'll help them remember the good things. Not this illness, not the sadness, but the love, the laughter. Promise me you'll make sure they know how much I loved being their mother." "I promise," William said, his own voice breaking. "I promise they'll know. I promise they'll remember. And I promise that love will carry us through this, all of us." Outside their window, London continued its eternal rhythm, unaware that within the walls of Kensington Palace, a family was beginning the most difficult journey of their lives. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new moments of both heartbreak and grace. But tonight, they held each other close and remembered that love, even in the face of loss, is the most powerful force in the world. The story of their last goodbye was just beginning, but it would be written not in sadness alone, but in the indelible ink of a love that had changed not just their lives, but the very nature of the British royal family. And perhaps, in the end, that would be Catherine's greatest legacy, not just the causes she championed or the duties she fulfilled, but the love she brought to a family and an institution that had sometimes forgotten how to love openly, genuinely, and without reservation. 2 weeks had passed since the devastating diagnosis, and Catherine had insisted on maintaining her public schedule, though William could see the toll it was taking on her. The Early Childhood Development Summit she had organized months ago was set to take place at the Royal Institution, and despite the private secretary's gentle suggestions to cancel, Catherine was determined to see it through. The morning of the event, William watched from their bedroom doorway as Catherine applied her makeup with the practiced precision of someone who had spent years in the public eye. But he noticed things others might miss, the slight tremor in her hands as she held the mascara wand, the way she had to pause and take deep breaths between each step of her routine. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly, approaching her from behind. Their eyes met in the vanity mirror, and he saw the exhaustion she was trying so hard to hide. "Yes, I do," Catherine replied, her voice steady but tired. "This summit represents 2 years of work. There are researchers coming from around the world, policy makers who can make real change happen, children who will benefit from what we accomplish today." She set down her lipstick and turned to face him. "I won't let this disease take that away from me. Not yet." William nodded, understanding but not liking it. He had learned over their years together that when Catherine set her mind to something, especially something related to her charitable work, there was no dissuading her. It was one of the qualities that had made her such an effective member of the royal family, but now it worried him. The drive to the Royal Institution was conducted in relative silence, both of them lost in thought. Catherine stared out the window at the London streets, memorizing details she had never paid attention to before, the way the morning light hit the Georgian architecture, the bustling energy of people heading to work, the timeless quality of the city she had come to love. "Do you ever wonder," she said suddenly, "what our lives would have been like if we had been ordinary people? If I had stayed in that flat in Chelsea, working for my parents' company, and you had remained a search and rescue pilot?" William considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But then, I think about the good we've been able to do, the platform we've had to make real change. Would we have been happier? Maybe. But would we have been able to touch as many lives? Catherine smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her all morning. You're right. And I wouldn't change it. Even knowing how it ends, I wouldn't change any of it. The Royal Institution was buzzing with activity when they arrived. Researchers, child development experts, government officials, and members of various charitable organizations had gathered for what many considered the most important conference on early childhood development in a generation. Catherine had spent months planning every detail, from the keynote speakers to the working group sessions. Dr. Sarah Chun, a leading researcher from Harvard's Center on the Developing Child, was the first to greet them. Your Royal Highness, I can't thank you enough for organizing this. The potential for real policy change coming out of today is extraordinary. Catherine lit up at the praise, and William saw glimpses of the woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago at St. Andrews, passionate, engaged, determined to make a difference. For a moment, he could almost forget the shadow that hung over them. The morning session was devoted to presentations on the latest research in early brain development. Catherine sat in the front row, asking thoughtful questions and taking detailed notes. William watched from the back of the room, marveling at her ability to compartmentalize, to be fully present for something so important to her despite everything they were going through at home. During the lunch break, as Catherine mingled with the delegates, William noticed Dr. Harrison, her oncologist, slip quietly into the building. They had arranged for him to be nearby, just in case, though Catherine didn't know about this precaution. William intercepted him in the corridor. How is she really doing? William asked without preamble. Dr. Harrison's expression was carefully neutral. She's remarkable, Your Royal Highness. The determination, the refusal to let this define her, it's extraordinary. But, he paused, choosing his words carefully. The cancer is aggressive. Each day is a gift, but we must be realistic about what's coming. William felt his chest tighten. How long before? It's difficult to say precisely. Weeks, perhaps a few months. The important thing is to make the time count, to ensure she has the opportunity to do the things that matter most to her. After the doctor left, William stood alone in the corridor for several minutes, trying to compose himself before rejoining the conference. The casual way people spoke about his wife's death, the clinical terminology that reduced their entire world to medical probabilities, it was almost unbearable. The afternoon session focused on policy implementation, and Catherine had been scheduled to give the closing remarks. As the time approached, William could see her fatigue becoming more pronounced. She had been running on adrenaline and determination all day, but even her remarkable reserves were beginning to fail. When she rose to speak, however, Catherine transformed. Standing at the podium, she seemed to draw energy from somewhere deep within herself. Her voice was clear and strong as she addressed a room full of experts and policymakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we gather here today not just as researchers or officials or advocates, but as people who believe in the transformative power of love and attention in a child's earliest years. The science you've shared today confirms what parents have always known instinctively, that the way we treat our youngest citizens will determine the kind of society we become. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room, and William saw several delegates leaning forward, captivated by her words. I've been privileged to visit early childhood programs across the United Kingdom and around the world. I've seen what happens when we invest in our children from the very beginning. Stronger families, healthier communities, more resilient societies. But I've also seen the cost of neglect, the price we pay when we fail to recognize that a child's first 5 years are not a dress rehearsal for life. They are life itself. As she continued speaking about brain architecture and toxic stress and the critical importance of responsive caregiving, William felt a profound sense of pride mixed with heartbreak. This was Catherine at her best, passionate, informed, compelling. And this might be one of the last times he would see her like this. The children we're working to help today may grow up to cure cancer, to solve climate change, to bridge divides that seem insurmountable. Or they may simply grow up to be loving parents, good neighbors, contributing members of their communities. Both outcomes are equally precious, equally worthy of our investment. The room erupted in applause as Catherine concluded her remarks, and several delegates rose to give her a standing ovation. William could see tears in the eyes of some of the attendees, though they didn't know the additional poignancy her words carried. After the official conference ended, there was a reception in the institution's ornate library. Catherine moved through the crowd with her usual grace, but William stayed close, watching for signs that she needed to rest. As the evening wore on, He noticed her responses becoming shorter, her smile requiring more effort. Finally, he approached her during a brief lull in conversation. Perhaps we should think about heading home, he suggested quietly. You've had a long day. Catherine glanced around the room, where animated conversations about policy implementation were continuing. Just a few more minutes, she said. This is important. But, as she turned to rejoin a group discussing longitudinal studies, she swayed slightly on her feet. William immediately steadied her, and she looked up at him with an expression that acknowledged what they both knew. Her body was beginning to fail her, no matter how strong her spirit remained. All right, she said quietly. Perhaps it is time to go home. The drive back to Kensington Palace was quieter than the morning journey. Catherine sat with her head resting against the window, her eyes closed but not sleeping. William could see the exhaustion etched in every line of her face. It was a good day, she said without opening her eyes. Real progress was made today. Policies that will help thousands of children. You were brilliant, William replied. You always are. I keep thinking about legacy, Catherine said, finally, opening her eyes to look at him. What we leave behind when we're gone. For most people, it's their children, their family. For us, it's that plus more. The causes we champion, the changes we help bring about. Your legacy will be extraordinary, William said. The mental health work, the early childhood initiatives, the way you've modernized the monarchy just by being yourself. But Kate, he reached over and took her hand. Your most important legacy will always be our children. The love you've given them, the values you've instilled. That will outlast everything else. When they arrived home, the children were already asleep, but Catherine insisted on looking in on each of them. William followed her up the stairs, noting how she gripped the banister more tightly than usual, how each step seemed to require conscious effort. In George's room, she stood by his bed for a long moment, watching their eldest son sleep. At 9, he was beginning to understand the weight of his future role, but he was still young enough to believe his parents would always be there to guide him. I worry about him most, Catherine whispered. The pressure he'll face, the expectations. I wanted to be there to help him navigate it all. He has your strength, William replied. And your compassion. He'll be fine. In Charlotte's room, Catherine gently smoothed their daughter's hair back from her forehead. Charlotte stirred slightly but didn't wake, and Catherine leaned down to kiss her temple. She's going to be extraordinary, Catherine said. Independent, fierce, kind. I see so much of myself in her. But she'll be braver than I ever was. Louis's room was last, and their youngest was sprawled across his bed in the careless way only children can sleep. Catherine adjusted his covers and picked up the stuffed elephant that had fallen to the floor. He won't remember me very well, she said, and William heard the crack in her voice. He's so young. He'll remember love, William said firmly. He'll remember being cherished, being safe, being wanted. And when he's older, we'll make sure he knows who his mother was, what she stood for, how much she loved him. Back in their own room, as Catherine slowly removed her jewelry and changed into her nightgown, William watched her with the intensity of someone trying to memorize every detail. How many more evenings like this would they have? How many more conversations, more shared moments, more ordinary intimacies? The doctors want to start more aggressive treatment, Catherine said as she sat at her dressing table, removing her makeup. Chemotherapy that might buy more time. What do you want to do? Catherine met his eyes in the mirror. I want to weigh the time it might give us against the quality of that time. I don't want the children's last memories of me to be of someone too sick to be present for them. It was such a Catherine thing to say, thinking first of everyone else, of how her choices would affect the people she loved. William crossed the room and stood behind her chair, his hands on her shoulders. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. We'll face it together. Together, Catherine repeated, leaning back against him. I love the sound of that. Even if together has to have an ending. Outside their window, London sparkled in the darkness. Millions of lights representing millions of lives going about their ordinary business. But inside Kensington Palace, in their private apartment, a future king and his dying wife held each other close and tried to find the courage to face tomorrow. The conference had been a success, a fitting capstone to Catherine's work in early childhood development. But it had also been a reminder of the ticking clock that governed their lives now, the precious nature of each day, each moment, each breath. As they settled into bed that night, Catherine curled against William's side in the way that had become second nature over their years together. Thank you for today, she whispered. For letting me do what I needed to do. Thank you for being you, William replied, his voice thick with emotion. for showing me what real courage looks like. In the darkness, as Catherine's breathing gradually evened out into sleep, William lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about time and love and the unfairness of a world where someone like Catherine could be taken away while there was still so much good she wanted to do. But he also thought about the power of what she had already accomplished, the lives she had touched, the changes she had set in motion that would continue long after she was gone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions about treatment and time and how to say goodbye. But tonight, she was still here, still breathing beside him, still the woman who had transformed not just his life, but the very nature of what it meant to be royal in the 21st century. And, for now, that had to be enough. The decision to tell the children came sooner than they had hoped. George had started asking questions, pointed, perceptive questions that made it clear their 9-year-old son had noticed the hushed conversations, the frequent doctor visits, the way his parents looked at him, and his siblings with a new intensity that bordered on desperation. Catherine had lost more weight in the past month, and despite her best efforts to maintain normalcy, the physical changes were becoming impossible to hide. She tired more easily, needed longer to recover from public appearances, and had started experiencing episodes of pain that left her pale and shaken. On a gray Saturday morning in November, with rain pattering against the windows of their sitting room at Kensington Palace, Catherine and William made the hardest decision of their parental lives. The children were playing quietly nearby, George reading in his favorite chair, Charlotte coloring at the small table, and Louis building an elaborate tower with his blocks. "Children," Catherine called softly, her voice carrying a weight that immediately got their attention. "Could you come sit with Mummy and Daddy for a moment? We need to have an important talk." The shift in the room's atmosphere was immediate. George closed his book and approached with the careful, observant manner that had become more pronounced lately. Charlotte abandoned her coloring, sensing something significant in her mother's tone. Louis, at 4, simply followed his sibling's lead, though his small hand reached instinctively for his stuffed elephant. They arranged themselves on the large sofa, Catherine in the middle with Charlotte curled against her left side, and Louis on her right. William sat across from them in his chair, positioned so he could see all their faces, ready to provide support however it was needed. "You know how Mummy has been seeing doctors lately," Catherine began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to share. "And you've probably noticed that I've been more tired than usual." George nodded solemnly. He had indeed noticed, and William could see in his eldest son's eyes that he had already begun to piece together that something was seriously wrong. "Well, the doctors have found that Mummy is very sick," Catherine continued, choosing her words with the care of someone who understood the weight each one would carry. "It's called cancer, and it means that my body isn't working the way it should." Charlotte looked up sharply, her blue eyes wide with confusion and the beginning of fear. "But you'll get better, won't you, Mummy? The doctors will fix you." The question hung in the air like a prayer, and Catherine felt her heart break and mend simultaneously. She reached down to stroke Charlotte's hair, memorizing the silky texture, the way it caught the light. "Sometimes, my darling, the doctors can fix the sickness. But sometimes they can't. And Mummy's sickness is the kind that can't be fixed." Louis, who had been listening with the incomplete comprehension of a 4-year-old, suddenly understood enough to be frightened. "Mummy's not going to die, is she?" he asked, his small voice trembling. The directness of the question from her youngest child nearly undid Catherine's carefully maintained composure. William leaned forward, ready to intervene, but Catherine gave him the slightest shake of her head. This was her moment, her responsibility. "Yes, my sweet boy," Catherine said gently, pulling Louis closer. "Mummy is going to die, but not today and not tomorrow. I'm going to be here for a while longer, and we're going to make that time very special." The silence that followed was profound. George, who had been sitting very straight and still, finally spoke. "How long?" he asked, and William marveled at his son's ability to ask the question none of them wanted to answer. "We don't know exactly," Catherine replied honestly. "The doctors think maybe a few months. But, George, I need you to understand something very important. This is not your fault, or Charlotte's fault, or Louis's fault. Nothing any of you did or didn't do caused this to happen. Sometimes bad things happen to good people, and we don't know why." Charlotte had started to cry, quiet tears that rolled down her cheeks as she processed what her mother was telling her. "I don't want you to die, Mummy," she whispered. "I don't want to die either, sweetheart," Catherine said, her own tears finally starting to fall. I want to see you grow up and fall in love and have children of your own. I want to teach you how to drive and help you with your homework and embarrass you in front of your friends when you're teenagers. William watched this conversation unfold with a mixture of profound admiration for Catherine's courage and overwhelming grief for what they were all losing. The children's reactions were heartbreakingly age-appropriate. George trying to be strong and understand the practical implications, Charlotte devastated by the emotional reality, Louis confused but clinging to his mother. But here's what I need you all to remember, Catherine continued, her voice growing stronger. Love doesn't end when someone dies. I will always, always be your mummy. Even when you can't see me or touch me, I'll still love you more than all the stars in the sky. And Daddy will be here, and Grandpa Charles will be here, and all the people who love you will make sure you're taken care of. Will you watch over us? Louis asked, his question carrying the innocent faith of a child who hadn't yet learned that the world could be cruel and unfair. Every single day, Catherine promised. When you see a butterfly or find a pretty stone or hear your favorite song, that will be me letting you know I'm still with you. George, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange, finally spoke up. What about when I become king? Who will help me know what to do? The question revealed the depth of his understanding about his future role and his recognition that he had been counting on his mother's guidance through the challenges ahead. Catherine looked at William, and, in that glance, they shared a moment of parental communication that needed no words. You have the best father in the world, Catherine said, reaching out to touch George's face. And you have something else. You have everything I've tried to teach you about kindness and service and remembering that being royal means caring for other people. Those lessons will stay with you forever. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with the children asking questions that ranged from the practical, who will help me learn to braid hair, to the existential, where do people go when they die? Catherine answered each one with patience and honesty appropriate to their ages, while William provided supporting explanations and comfort as needed. Finally, when the hardest parts had been said and the children were beginning to show signs of emotional exhaustion, Catherine made a decision that would become one of her most treasured memories. I want to do something special with each of you, she announced. Something that will be just ours, something you can remember when you want to feel close to me. Over the following weeks, Catherine embarked on what she privately called her memory-making mission. With George, she spent hours in the palace library, creating a series of letters to be opened at significant moments in his future, his 16th birthday, his graduation, his wedding day, his coronation. She wrote about the qualities she saw in him, the hopes she had for his reign, and the pride she felt in the young man he was already becoming. Remember, she told him as they worked together one afternoon, being king isn't about the crown or the ceremony or the power. It's about service. It's about using your position to make life better for other people. You have such a good heart, George. Trust it. With Charlotte, Catherine planned elaborate tea parties and dress-up sessions, but, more importantly, she began teaching her daughter about being a strong woman in a world that would constantly scrutinize her choices. They talked about confidence and kindness, about standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. You're going to face challenges I never had to face, Catherine told Charlotte as they painted their nails one evening. The world is changing, and being a royal woman in your generation will be different from anything I experienced. But you're brave and smart and kind, and that will see you through anything. With Louis, Catherine focused on creating sensory memories, special songs they sang together, games they played, stories she made up featuring brave little boys who looked suspiciously like him. She recorded herself reading his favorite bedtime stories, knowing that her voice would comfort him long after she was gone. During this period, William watched Catherine with a mixture of awe and heartbreak. Despite her deteriorating physical condition, she threw herself into these final connections with their children with an intensity that was both inspiring and devastating. She was literally loving them as hard as she could, trying to pack a lifetime of mothering into whatever time she had left. The public, meanwhile, remained largely unaware of the drama unfolding behind palace walls. Catherine continued to make selected public appearances, though they were fewer and more carefully managed. At a children's hospital visit in late November, she spent extra time with each young patient, and the staff noticed that she seemed particularly moved by her interactions with the families. She was different that day, one of the nurses would later recall. More present, somehow, like she was really seeing each child, really listening to what they were saying. It was beautiful, but also a bit sad, though we didn't understand why at the time. As December approached, the family began what Catherine privately thought of as their last Christmas preparations. She threw herself into the holiday planning with determination that worried William, but also filled him with pride. She wanted everything to be perfect, not just for this year, but to create traditions and memories that would comfort their children in future Christmases when she wouldn't be there. They decided to spend Christmas at Sandringham with the extended royal family, though Catherine insisted on several modifications to accommodate her condition. Instead of the usual full schedule of public appearances and formal dinners, they planned a more intimate celebration focused on family time and cherished traditions. "I want the children to remember Christmas as magical," Catherine told William as they wrapped presents one evening. "Not as the Christmas mummy was sick, but as the Christmas we were all together and everything was perfect." The wrapping paper crinkled as she worked, and William noticed how much effort even simple tasks now required. But Catherine's face was serene, focused on the pleasure of choosing exactly the right gift for each child, writing personal notes that would make each present special. "Do you remember our first Christmas together?" she asked suddenly, looking up from the dollhouse she was wrapping for Charlotte. "At your parents' house," William replied immediately. "Your mom made that incredible Christmas pudding, and your dad told terrible jokes all day." Catherine laughed, the sound lighting up her whole face. "And you were so nervous about fitting in, about whether they'd think you were good enough for their daughter." "I was terrified," William admitted. "I knew even then that I wanted to marry you, but I wasn't sure if you felt the same way." "I did," Catherine said softly. "I think I knew from almost the beginning. There was just something about you, the way you made me laugh, the way you saw the world. I knew I wanted to build a life with you." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in memories of their courtship, their wedding, the early days of their marriage when the future had seemed infinite and full of possibility. Now, with that future truncated in ways they never could have imagined, each memory felt both precious and painful. As Catherine finished wrapping Louis's toy garage, she paused and looked directly at William. "Promise me something," she said. "Promise me you'll tell them stories about us, about how we met, how we fell in love, the silly things we did when we were young. I want them to know we had joy, not just duty." "I promise," William said immediately. "They'll know everything. The good, the bad, the ridiculous. They'll know their parents were real people who loved each other and loved them." Catherine nodded, satisfied, and returned to her wrapping. But William continued to watch her, memorizing the way she bit her lip when concentrating, the careful way she folded each corner of paper, the satisfaction on her face when each package was perfectly presented. These were the moments he knew he would remember most clearly, not the formal state occasions or the public appearances, but the quiet domestic scenes where Catherine's true character shone through. Her insistence on making everything beautiful and meaningful, even when she was facing her own mortality, revealed the depth of her love for their family. Later that evening, after the children were in bed and the presents were hidden away, Catherine and William sat together in their sitting room, sharing a cup of tea and watching the fire crackle in the grate. The room was decorated for Christmas, a tradition Catherine had insisted on maintaining, and the warm glow of the lights made everything feel peaceful and safe. "I've been thinking about time again," Catherine said, curled up against William's side. "How it's funny that we're always trying to save time or spend time or make time, as if it's a commodity we can control." "What have you concluded?" William asked, stroking her hair. "That maybe time isn't about quantity at all. Maybe it's about depth, about how fully we live each moment we're given." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with the firelight. "I may not have as much time as we hoped, but I've been so lucky in the time I've had. I got to be a mother, a wife, a princess. I got to make a difference. How many people can say that?" William felt his chest tighten with emotion. Even facing death, Catherine was finding ways to feel grateful, to focus on what she had rather than what she was losing. It was so fundamentally who she was, someone who looked for light in dark places, who found reasons to hope even in hopeless situations. "I love you," he said, the words carrying the weight of all the years they'd shared and all the years they would miss. "I love you too," Catherine replied. "Always and forever, no matter what comes next." Outside, London was settling into winter, preparing for the holiday season that would mark their last Christmas together. But inside Kensington Palace, a family was creating memories that would have to last a lifetime, holding tight to love in the face of loss, and discovering that even in the darkest times, there could still be light, still be joy, still be hope. Christmas at Sandringham carried a bittersweet quality that everyone felt, but nobody explicitly acknowledged. The Norfolk estate, usually bustling with the controlled chaos of extended royal family gatherings, had been transformed into something more intimate and precious for what everyone understood would be Catherine's final Christmas. King Charles had quietly arranged for the most private wing of the house to be reserved for William, Catherine, and the children, while still maintaining enough of the traditional festivities to ensure the grandchildren wouldn't feel deprived of their usual royal Christmas experience. The balance between normalcy and accommodation for Catherine's condition required delicate management that the king had personally overseen. Catherine woke on Christmas Eve morning in the four-poster bed that had housed royal guests for generations, the weak December sunlight filtering through heavy curtains that she had loved since her first Christmas at Sandringham as William's girlfriend. She lay still for several minutes, listening to the sounds of the house awakening around her, distant voices, footsteps in corridors, the comfortable sounds of family preparing for celebration. William was already up, she realized, his side of the bed cool to the touch. Through the partially open bathroom door, she could hear the sound of running water and knew he was attempting to maintain his usual morning routine despite the fact that nothing about their situation was routine anymore. The past month had brought significant changes in Catherine's condition. Her energy levels had dropped noticeably, and she now required assistance with tasks that had once been effortless. But more concerning to William was the way pain had started to intrude on her days with increasing frequency, despite the medications Dr. Harrison had prescribed. "Good morning, beautiful," William said as he emerged from the bathroom, already dressed in the casual clothes that had become their Christmas Eve tradition. Louis was still in his pajamas, his hair sticking up at impossible angles, while Charlotte had already changed into the red velvet dress she had picked out specially for Christmas Eve. George, ever the responsible older brother, was fully dressed but carrying Louis's forgotten slippers. "Mummy, Daddy," Charlotte launched herself onto the bed with the abandon of a 7-year-old who hadn't yet learned to be careful around sick people. "Is it time for presents? Can we go downstairs? Is everyone else awake?" Catherine caught her daughter and pulled her close, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. These morning snuggles had become even more precious over the past months, and Catherine made a mental note to remember this exact moment. The weight of Charlotte's small body against hers, the way Louis climbed up to join them, the protective way George hovered nearby. After breakfast, William said, enforcing the rule they had established years ago, "And after everyone else is awake and ready. But I think we might be able to arrange for some hot chocolate in the nursery while we wait." The mention of hot chocolate achieved the desired effect of temporarily distracting the children from their present-focused agenda. As they trooped out of the bedroom to get properly dressed, Catherine remained in bed for a few more minutes, gathering the energy needed for what would be an emotionally and physically demanding day. Christmas Eve at Sandringham followed traditions that had been established over generations of royal Christmases. The extended family gathered in the drawing room for the exchange of gifts, a German tradition brought to the British royal family by Prince Albert, and maintained faithfully ever since. But this year, Catherine found herself watching everything with the heightened awareness of someone experiencing something for the last time. She sat in one of the comfortable chairs that had been discreetly positioned to give her the best view of the proceedings while accommodating her need to rest frequently. From this vantage point, she could see her children's faces as they opened gifts from their cousins, their grandfather, their aunts, and uncles. George received a collection of books about previous kings of England, carefully chosen by Charles to begin his grandson's deeper education about the role he would one day inherit. Charlotte was delighted with art supplies and a child-sized easel from her Aunt Anne. Louis, to no one's surprise, was most excited about a collection of toy cars from various family members. But the gift that moved Catherine most deeply was one that Charles gave to her privately, after the main festivities had concluded and the family had dispersed to prepare for Christmas Eve dinner. "I wanted to give you this when we could have a quiet moment," Charles said, presenting Catherine with a small, beautifully wrapped package. "It belonged to my grandmother, and before that, to her mother." Inside the elegant wrapping was a jewel case containing a delicate sapphire bracelet, clearly antique, and obviously precious both monetarily and sentimentally. "I want you to choose which of your children should have it," Charles continued. "But I also wanted you to know that you have been the daughter I never had, and I will never stop being grateful that William found you." Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes as she fastened the bracelet around her wrist. The sapphires caught the light from the Christmas tree, and she realized that this piece of jewelry represented not just royal history, but her acceptance into the family in a way that went beyond titles or ceremonies. "Thank you, Papa," she whispered, using the name that had become natural over their years as family members. "This means more to me than you know." Christmas Eve dinner was a more intimate affair than usual, with just the immediate family gathered around the polished mahogany table. Catherine had insisted on participating fully, though William noticed she ate very little and required frequent breaks between courses. The conversation ranged from light-hearted reminiscences about previous Christmases to gentle discussion of plans for the new year. Catherine listened more than she spoke, memorizing the sound of her children's laughter, the way William's face lit up when Louis told a particularly convoluted story about his toy cars, the warmth in Charles's voice when he addressed his grandchildren. After dinner, as the children settled into the drawing room for the traditional Christmas Eve film, this year's selection was The Polar Express, chosen specifically because Louis had become obsessed with trains. Catherine stepped outside onto the terrace for a moment of fresh air and solitude. The Norfolk winter was crisp and clear, with stars visible in the dark sky despite the ambient light from the house. Catherine pulled her wrap closer around her shoulders and stood quietly, looking out across the grounds where she had walked so many times before, where her children had learned to love the countryside that would one day be part of their inheritance. William found her there several minutes later, approaching quietly and slipping his arms around her from behind. "Penny for your thoughts," he murmured against her ear. "I was thinking about time again," Catherine replied, leaning back against his solid warmth. "About how we mark it with celebrations and traditions and holidays. Last year, Christmas felt routine, expected. This year, every moment feels like a gift. Do you want to go back inside? The film's just starting." Catherine shook her head. "Just another minute. I want to remember this, the peace, the stars, the way the house looks with all the Christmas lights. I want to remember feeling happy, not just sad." They stood together in comfortable silence, both understanding that this was one of those moments that would be preserved in memory long after everything else had faded. The sound of children's laughter drifted from the drawing room, mixing with the gentle Norfolk wind and the distant sound of church bells from the village. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold, and Catherine woke to find her bed surrounded by three excited children who had clearly been waiting with enormous patience for their parents to wake up. Father Christmas came, Louis announced unnecessarily, since the evidence was visible through the open bedroom door. Stockings that had been empty the night before were now bulging with small gifts and treats. Catherine smiled at the tradition they had maintained of allowing the children to bring their stockings to the main bedroom for opening, creating a cozy family scene that had become one of their most treasured Christmas customs. As the children tore into their stocking gifts with gleeful abandon, Catherine found herself focusing not on the presents themselves, but on the expressions of joy on her children's faces. George's careful examination of each item before moving to the next, Charlotte's delighted squeals over every discovery, Louis's tendency to become distracted by the wrapping paper itself. These were the details she wanted to preserve. "Look, Mummy." Charlotte held up a small jewelry box that had been tucked deep in her stocking. "It plays music." The tiny ballerina inside the box spun to a melody that Catherine recognized as Fur Elise, and she realized that William must have spent considerable time searching for exactly the right gift to put in their daughter's stocking. "It's beautiful, darling," Catherine said, drawing Charlotte close for a hug. "You'll have to show me how to wind it up later." The morning continued with the traditional royal family church service at St. Mary Magdalene, though Catherine had reluctantly decided not to attend. The physical demands of the walk from Sandringham House to the church, combined with the inevitable crowd of well-wishers and photographers, seemed beyond her current capabilities. Instead, she spent the morning writing in the leather-bound journal she had started keeping soon after her diagnosis. Initially intended as a medical record, the journal had evolved into something more personal, a collection of thoughts, memories, and letters to her children that she hoped might comfort them in the future. Today's entry was addressed to all three of her children. "My darling ones, today is our Christmas together, and I want you to know that watching you open your stockings this morning was one of the most perfect moments of my life. George, I see in you such wisdom and kindness already. You will be a wonderful king someday, but more importantly, you are a wonderful person today. Charlotte, your joy is infectious, your spirit unbreakable. Never let the world dim your light. Louis, my sweet baby, You bring laughter wherever you go. Hold on to that gift. The world needs more people who can find joy in simple things. I hope that every Christmas morning for the rest of your lives, you'll remember that you are loved beyond measure. When you hang your stockings, when you sing carols, when you watch Christmas films, remember that love doesn't end. It just changes form. You're always loving, Mummy. When the family returned from church, they found Catherine in the drawing room, the journal closed beside her, playing a quiet game of chess with one of Charles's equerries who had kindly volunteered to keep her company. "How was the service?" she asked as the children tumbled into the room, still in their smart church clothes, but already anticipating the afternoon's festivities. "The rector mentioned you in the prayers," William told her quietly. "Asked for blessings on all members of the royal family, especially those facing challenges." Catherine nodded, understanding that this was likely the beginning of the public's gradual awareness of her situation. They had decided to make a formal announcement after the new year, but in the small communities around the royal estates, news had a way of spreading through careful words and gentle hints. The afternoon brought the traditional Christmas lunch, an elaborate affair that brought together not just the immediate family, but also staff members who had served the royal household faithfully over many years. Catherine made an effort to speak with each person individually, thanking them for their service and their kindness to her family. "Your Royal Highness," said Mrs. Patterson, who had served as head housekeeper at Sandringham for nearly 20 years, "it's been an honor to serve your family. The way you've brought such warmth to this house, such love, it's made all the difference." Catherine felt tears threaten as she realized that these conversations, too, were goodbyes. These people had been part of her life for over a decade, had helped care for her children, had been present for countless family celebrations and quiet domestic moments. "Thank you," Catherine replied, clasping the older woman's hand. "You've helped make this place feel like home for all of us." As the afternoon wore on and the light began to fade, Catherine found herself growing more tired but also more determined to experience every moment fully. When Louis asked her to read him a story, she chose the longest book she could find. When Charlotte wanted to play dress-up, Catherine suggested they raid the costume box that had been stored at Sandringham for visiting grandchildren. But it was her conversation with George that evening that would remain most clearly etched in her memory. They were alone in the library after dinner, ostensibly looking for a book about astronomy that George had requested, when her eldest son turned to her with the serious expression that made him seem older than his 9 years. "Mummy," he said carefully, "I've been thinking about what happens when you're not here anymore." Catherine felt her breath catch, but she maintained the calm demeanor that had become second nature when discussing difficult topics with the children. "What have you been thinking about?" she asked gently. "About whether I'll be able to remember your voice," George said, "and whether I'll still know what you would want me to do when I have to make important decisions." The question revealed such depth of understanding about loss and responsibility that Catherine felt her heart break for the burden her young son was already carrying. "Oh, my darling boy," she said, settling into one of the library's comfortable chairs and patting her lap in invitation. Despite his increasing awareness of his dignity as future king, George still occasionally sought the comfort of his mother's lap when the world felt overwhelming. "Let me tell you something very important," Catherine continued as George curled against her. "Love creates a kind of wisdom that doesn't depend on memory. When you love someone deeply, you learn their values, their way of thinking, their heart. Even if you can't remember my exact words, you'll remember my love, and that will guide you. But what if I make mistakes? What if I disappoint people?" Catherine smiled, thinking about all the ways this conversation echoed concerns she had harbored when she first joined the royal family. "You will make mistakes," she said honestly. "Everyone does, even kings. But making mistakes doesn't mean failing, as long as you learn from them and keep trying to do better. The most important thing isn't being perfect, George. It's caring about other people and trying to use your position to help them." They talked for nearly an hour, covering topics that range from the practical aspects of royal duty to the philosophical questions about leadership and service. Catherine found herself drawing on conversations she had had with William, with Charles, with her own parents, trying to distill years of learning into wisdom her son could carry forward. When they finally returned to the drawing room, they found the rest of the family engaged in the traditional Christmas evening activities, board games, puzzles, and the gentle conversation that marked the end of a successful holiday celebration. As Catherine settled beside William on the sofa, watching their children play with cousins and grandparents, she felt a profound sense of completion. This had been exactly the Christmas she had hoped for, not perfect in any objective sense, but perfect in its warmth, its love, its creation of memories that would comfort her family long after she was gone. "Thank you," she whispered to William as the evening wound down, and the children began showing signs of the exhaustion that comes from too much excitement and too many treats. "For what? For this? For today? For making it possible for me to have one more perfect Christmas with our babies." William's response was to pull her closer, and Catherine closed her eyes, listening to the sound of her family's laughter and the crackling fire, committing every detail to memory. Tomorrow would bring the reality of her condition back into sharp focus. But tonight, she was simply a mother and wife surrounded by love, and that was enough. That was everything. The new year brought an inevitable shift in Catherine's condition that everyone could see, but nobody wanted to acknowledge openly. The brief burst of energy that had carried her through Christmas had faded, leaving behind a frailty that made even simple tasks exhausting. Dr. Harrison had become a frequent visitor to Kensington Palace, his medical bag a constant reminder of the battle Catherine was slowly but surely losing. It was during the second week of January that Catherine made the decision to record farewell messages for each of her children, videos they could watch when they needed to hear her voice, to see her face, to remember that they had been loved beyond measure. The recordings were made in the privacy of her sitting room at Kensington Palace, with only William and their most trusted private secretary present. Catherine had spent days planning what she wanted to say, writing notes, and practicing, determined that these final messages would be perfect. For George, she spoke about leadership and service, about the weight of the crown, and the joy of helping others. "My darling boy," she said, looking directly into the camera as if she could see into his future, "being king isn't about being served. It's about serving others. You have such a good heart, such wisdom already. Trust that goodness, and you'll never go wrong. Remember that your greatest strength will always be your compassion." For Charlotte, the message focused on strength and independence, on being true to herself in a world that would constantly scrutinize her choices. "My beautiful girl," Catherine said, "you are fierce and kind and brilliant. Don't ever let anyone dim your light or make you smaller than you are. You can be anything you want to be, do anything you set your mind to. I believe in you completely." For Louis, the message was simpler but no less profound, filled with reminders of their shared songs and games, promises that love continues even when people can't be seen. "My sweet baby," Catherine said, "you bring joy wherever you go. Keep laughing, keep being curious, keep believing in magic. Mummy will always be with you, watching over you, so proud of the wonderful boy you're growing up to be." The hardest recording was the one she made for William, not for immediate viewing, but for some time in the future when he might need to remember who they had been together before illness and loss had overshadowed their love story. "My dearest William," she began, and had to pause to compose herself before continuing. "By the time you watch this, I hope enough time has passed that you can remember us with more joy than sadness. You have been the love of my life, my partner in everything, my closest friend. I need you to know that every moment of our marriage has been a gift." She talked about their early days at St. Andrews, their tentative courtship, the moment she knew she wanted to spend her life with him. She spoke about their wedding day, the births of their children, the quiet domestic moments that had made up the texture of their shared life. "I need you to know," Catherine continued, "that when the time comes, and it will come, for you to love someone else, you have my blessing. Don't carry guilt about moving forward. Our children need you to be whole, to be happy. They need to see that love can survive loss, that it's possible to build something beautiful from grief." The recording session left Catherine emotionally and physically exhausted, but also somehow lighter. The messages felt like a gift she was giving not just to her family, but to herself. Insurance that the most important things would be said, that love would be preserved and transmitted even when she couldn't be there to express it in person. As January progressed, the palace began the delicate process of preparing for the inevitable. Staff members were briefed on protocols, though conversations remained euphemistic and careful. Plans were made for the children's continued education and care, for the modifications that would need to be made to William's role and responsibilities. Most difficult was the decision about when and how to inform the public. Catherine's last official engagement had been in December, and her absence from royal events was beginning to generate speculation in the press. The palace's usual response of private medical treatment was becoming less and less sufficient as photographers captured increasingly rare glimpses of Catherine looking pale and thin. The decision was taken out of their hands on a gray Tuesday morning in late January when a particularly enterprising photographer captured images of Dr. Harrison leaving Kensington Palace. Within hours, the speculation had reached fever pitch, and palace officials found themselves fielding increasingly direct questions about Catherine's health. "We need to get ahead of this," the palace's communications director advised in an emergency meeting. "The speculation is becoming damaging, and some of the rumors are wildly inaccurate. The kindest thing for everyone might be controlled transparency." Catherine, despite her weakened condition, insisted on being part of the decision-making process. "I won't have my story told by strangers," she said firmly. "If we're going to tell people, we're going to tell them the truth, in our own words, with dignity." The statement that was released on January 29th was simple and devastating. "The palace announces with deep sadness that Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales has been receiving treatment for an advanced form of cancer. The princess and her family are grateful for the support and privacy they have received during this difficult time. Her Royal Highness continues to spend time with her family and remains involved in her charitable work as her health permits. Further updates will be provided as appropriate." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Flowers began arriving at Kensington Palace within hours, not the formal arrangements typically sent to royal residences, but simple bouquets from ordinary people, children's drawings, handwritten notes expressing love and support. The gates of the palace became an impromptu shrine as people from around the world struggled to express their grief and solidarity. "Look at all the love," Catherine said from her bedroom window, watching the crowds gathering below. The outpouring of public affection had surprised her, though William understood that she had never fully grasped how deeply the British people had come to care for her. The international response was equally profound. World leaders sent private messages of support, charitable organizations she had championed released statements honoring her work, and social media was flooded with tributes to her grace, dedication, and warmth. But perhaps the most moving response came from an unexpected source. A video message recorded by a group of children from one of the early childhood development programs Catherine had helped establish. The children, most no older than 5, had created artwork and recorded simple messages. "Get better soon, Princess Catherine. Thank you for helping children. We love you." Catherine wept when she watched the video, overwhelmed by the realization that her work had touched lives in ways she was only now beginning to understand. As February arrived, Catherine's condition deteriorated more rapidly. She spent increasing amounts of time in bed, though she insisted on maintaining some semblance of routine for the children. She still read bedtime stories when she was able, still helped with homework when her energy permitted, still managed to be present for the important moments of their daily lives. It was during the first week of February that Catherine had what would turn out to be her last meaningful conversation with King Charles. He had come to visit on a quiet Sunday afternoon, ostensibly to see his grandchildren, but really to spend time with the daughter-in-law who had become so precious to him. They sat together in Catherine's sitting room, the king in his usual formal posture, but with an expression that revealed his deep emotion. Outside, London was experiencing one of those rare winter days when pale sunlight makes everything seem hopeful, though inside the palace, hope was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. "I want you to know," Charles said carefully, "how grateful I am for what you've brought to this family. The way you've modernized us, made us more human, more accessible. It's been extraordinary to watch." Catherine smiled, though the effort clearly cost her. "I never set out to change anything," she replied. "I just tried to be myself." "That's exactly why it worked," Charles said. "Authenticity can't be taught or manufactured. You brought genuine warmth to an institution that sometimes forgets how to feel." They talked about the children, about the future, about the ways Catherine's influence would continue long after she was gone. Charles spoke about his own experience with loss, about how grief could be transformed into something productive and meaningful if approached with intention and grace. "The children will be fine," he assured Catherine. "William will be a wonderful father, and they'll have all of us to support them. But, more importantly, they'll have everything you've given them, your values, your love, your example of how to live with purpose." As the conversation wound down, Charles made Catherine a promise that brought tears to both their eyes. "I will make sure," he said, "that your work continues. The early childhood initiatives, the mental health programs, they'll not only continue, they'll grow. Your legacy will be measured not just in the love you've given your family, but in the countless lives you've touched and will continue to touch. The second week of February brought a noticeable change in the atmosphere at Kensington Palace. Staff members moved more quietly through the corridors. Conversations were conducted in hushed tones, and there was a sense of waiting, of preparing for something everyone hoped would not come but knew was inevitable. Catherine spent her days moving between periods of sleep and moments of alertness when she could still engage with her children, still participate in the life of her family. William barely left her side, conducting what royal business was absolutely necessary from their private apartments, allowing others to handle everything that could be delegated. It was during one of Catherine's more lucid moments that she asked William to bring her the letters she had written, the ones meant to be opened at future milestones in the children's lives. "I want to add something to each one," she said, her voice weaker than it had been but still determined. "Something I've been thinking about." With William's help, she added postscripts to each letter, additional thoughts about love and loss, about finding joy after sadness, about the ways that love adapts and endures even when circumstances change dramatically. To George, remember that being strong doesn't mean not feeling sad. Let yourself grieve, let yourself miss me, but don't let that grief stop you from living fully. I want your life to be filled with joy and purpose and love. To Charlotte, you are going to face moments when you feel alone, when you think no one understands what you're going through. In those moments, remember that I understand. I know what it's like to be a woman in this family, to balance duty with authenticity. Trust yourself, always. To Louis, my sweet boy, you may not remember me clearly, but you'll remember feeling loved. That feeling will guide you through everything. When you're happy, when you're sad, when you're confused, remember that you are loved beyond measure. The act of writing these additions seemed to exhaust the last of Catherine's reserves, and she spent the following day mostly sleeping, waking only for brief periods when the children came to visit or when William needed to help her with medication or meals. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, in an irony that was not lost on William, Catherine rallied one final time. She woke early, clearer, and more alert than she had been in days, and asked William to help her get dressed in one of her favorite dresses, to do her hair and makeup as she would for any important day. "I want to spend a day with my family," she said simply. Really with them, not just sleeping nearby. It was a gift, this final day of clarity, and everyone seemed to understand its significance without needing to discuss it openly. The children, who had been increasingly subdued as they sensed the changes in their mother, brightened when they saw Catherine sitting up in the drawing room, looking more like herself than she had in weeks. They spent the morning looking through photo albums, telling stories about family holidays and special occasions. Catherine laughed at pictures of the children as babies, marveled at how much they had grown, shared memories of their various adventures and mishaps. "Do you remember," she asked George, "when you were 3 and decided to help in the kitchen by adding glitter to the biscuits we were making for Papa?" George giggled, the sound musical in the quiet room. "You said they were the most beautiful biscuits anyone had ever made." "They were," Catherine confirmed, "because you made them with love." In the afternoon, they played games, simple ones that didn't require much physical energy from Catherine, but allowed her to participate fully. Charlotte taught her mother a new card game she had learned at school, Louis showed off his improved reading skills with a picture book, and George engaged in the kind of thoughtful conversation that revealed his developing intellectual curiosity. As evening approached and the children were taken away for dinner and baths, Catherine and William found themselves alone together for what they both understood would likely be the last time. "Thank you," Catherine said, lying back against the pillows that had been arranged to keep her comfortable. "For today, for giving me one more perfect day with them." "Thank you," William replied, "for 15 years of perfect days. For 3 perfect children. For showing me what love really means." They talked quietly as the sun set outside their window, reminiscing about their early days together, their wedding, the births of their children, the quiet moments that had made up the fabric of their shared life. As Catherine,